Okay, checking my topic list for this week, and wow, okay, so we just did a politics episode, I thought, and the tie-in here is a little broad, but I'll give it my best shot. So yeah. Antifa, though popularly known in the 21st century as the general self-adopted name of multiple semi-connected groups emerging in response to the rise of nationalist and/or nativist movements throughout the United States and Western Europe, whose social media-savvy organizing tactics and DIY guerrilla aesthetic has been extremely influential on character, weapon, and gear design in modern gaming franchises as diverse as Call of Duty, Fortnite, Watch Dogs, and a slew of independent titles. The name and concept of organized militant anti-fascism owes its origins to the Antifasciste Action offshoot of pre-World War II German Communist Workers' Party. Now, though this original iteration did not survive the war against Nazism itself, post-war anti-fascist organizing continued in many forms before the popular readoption of the name arrived in tandem against the renewed presence of white supremacists, neo-Nazis, and skinhead movements in the 80s and 90s. Sorry? Final Fit. Oh, Tifa! Oh, okay. Oh, all right then. I mean, okay, fine. Do I even want to know what the issue is with Tifa? I mean, obviously it must have to do with the remake of Final Fantasy VII, and certainly there's just tons to talk about there in terms of expectation, adaptation, the fact that she's such a terrific multidimensional female character in a franchise that wasn't always known for always doing, particularly in a title from the 90s. Are you really fucking kidding me? Seriously? Really? We're really still doing this, huh? One of the most transformative games of all time, generation-defining and genre-redefining classic, long-anticipated remake that to this point appears to have morphed into something like an entirely new game, or several entirely new games, potentially coalescing into a kind of living, breathing thesis statement on the futility yet fascination with recapturing not even nostalgia for things that were, but the sense of things that never actually were. And the big discussion we're going to have is, hey, wait a minute, Tifa had really huge boobs in the original game and in the drawings, but now in the remake they look a little less huge because they redesigned the characters to look a little more like physically real humans, so she's wearing a sports bra and they don't stick out and bounce around so much, and my penis is sad. So, like, literally the dumbest thing we could talk about. Great, that's just great. I mean, I can do it, sure, fine. I mean, fellas, also, presumably some women, I guess, maybe. Do you know how a sports bra works? I mean, what its purpose is, or even, like, activewear in general, just any clothing that someone whose job is to run around kickboxing Shinra guys and monsters and shit might actually wear while doing so, because based on this being a complaint, it seems like maybe you don't. So just so we're clear, if you know an actual woman who still has this figure while wearing one, go get yourself an engagement ring and a nicer apartment, job, and car. Because no, I do not in fact think this counts as me being part of the problem also. Well, it's a ridiculous discussion to begin with, so I don't... Okay, yeah, so I'm a little frustrated. Also, sure, I should clarify this isn't like an anti-sexy character thing or a kink-shaming thing or whatever, but aren't you frustrated also? I mean, does it not bother you that not only is it 22 years since Final Fantasy VII, and not only are we still talking about Tifa's breasts, but no one is actually surprised that we're still talking about Tifa's breasts? Like, even forget the actual merits of the discussion for a moment. Is it not just a little bit sad that we're still here? Look, despite, the title of this show, I'm not someone who thinks that just because the Atari generation is now collecting Social Security, every bit of games discourse has to be some kind of pretentious treatise about narrative theory. And in fact, I could probably do a less angry-sounding episode than this on how the mistaken paradigm that a work has to be serious itself to be regarded as seriously is a huge reason why games writing and writing about games sucks so bad so often right now. But it's also true that some of our fixations here between this and the guys who whined about Mortal Kombat's female costumes the last time, or quote-unquote protests every time some anime porn game doesn't get a retail release in the US, can't help but make the whole thing look beyond childish, which is why we can't be surprised or all that upset about stuff like this. I mean, look at this, look at it. That's not a fake headline and pull quote or an Onion thing or a lead into a joke. That's a real thing from the Wall Street Journal. And we bring it on ourselves to a certain degree, and that's not even my full frustration. The full frustration is knowing that I can't, in fact, just ignore this, because true to form, gamer culture has come face to face with an actual compelling question of artistic and creative philosophy uniquely innate to the video games medium, and proceeds to not notice because it's literally too busy staring at big old tits. See, despite usual whinging about giving in to SJWs or whatever, it's fairly obvious that what's actually going on with this redesign cuts to the heart of what makes reimagining Final Fantasy VII such an unusual prospect, which is why I couldn't just ignore this particular dumb thing like I'd prefer to. The fact of it is, Tifa gets a realistically proportioned do-over for the same reason the other characters appear to have, because their models got rebuilt from the ground up with everything else to take advantage of modern hardware's ability to do just that. But what's interesting about it is that the change largely removes most of the stylistic collage and the abstraction of cartoon polygon characters moving around semi-static backgrounds that paradoxically helped unify the aesthetic tone of the original game by making the transition from quasi-cyberpunk future dystopia of the Midgar segment to the broader, more traditional Final Fantasy-esque world just outside a little bit less jarring. And so far, we haven't really seen what the Beyond Midgar part of the remake is going to look like, or how the most extreme high fantasy visuals, creatures, and characters will be reworked to go along with this new, more realistic approach. And I'd be willing to venture a guess that Square hasn't really nailed it down either, and that's why we're getting a whole game that's mostly only Midgar first and the second part later on, working out how far to push the connective tissue between the futuristic Blade Runner meets Brazil meets City of Lost Children urban warfare, and the new agey high fantasy stuff where the reimagined style seems so heavily favor of the first but not so much the second. That's an interesting concept to wrestle with. I mean, just figuring out how they're going to handle Red 13 alone is going to present some challenge in this contest, and it makes you wonder how much substance and style is going to have to change before it's an entirely different thing, at which point one has to ask if that's really what people wanted all along from this. Not to play the game again, but to re-experience their memory of it. But then which idealized memory are we talking about, given that so much of the late 90s 32-bit gaming moment was characterized by stylistic mashups like Final Fantasy VII, where the onus was to just get things to work on the hardware? You know, whose rose-tinted, edges-sanded off glass half full romanticized image of what Final Fantasy VII really was gets to win out between the people who mainly remember colorful Squeenix nonsense versus people for whom it was an angst-fueled romantic dystopian swashbuckler? Do you recall it as a relaxed JRPG grind-a-thon with nice cutscenes? Or does your memory distill the whole thing down to one big one-winged angel music video? You know, does the audience that wanted a better render of Tifa because she only really had the suggestion of displaying well-rounded, fully developed emotional complexity before really have the absolute moral and intellectual high ground above the audience that wanted that same better render of Tifa before because she only had the suggestion of displaying well-rounded, fully developed, big juice? Well, okay, yes, in that case they absolutely do have the higher, just all of the higher grounds. But the rest of it, yeah, there's a lot of nuance there. Actually, a very interesting and important discussion for the medium to have that we don't have nearly enough. Wouldn't it be great if, once in a while, we could get here without having to start over there? Just a thought.